so Popper 29. Oh, man.
Oh,
Starting the summer off right. Summer party days, July. What's a holiday? What? What's that?
No holidays for us.
So this one, right? Double Stop Heaven. And I have to say, I am very glad in studies like these that I practice my double stops daily. But even so, it is really difficult. I don't know how you found this one yourself.
Do you know, this one definitely was a bit of a challenge because you've got so many different things, right? A week is just not long enough for this study, hands down. It's not long enough to really get it to where you want it to go. This is kind of one of those studies we talk about that needs a bit of gestation time because you physically cannot practice that much thumb position without injuring yourself.
Yeah.
Unless that's all you're doing. If you've built up and you play Popper 29 every single day, then you've built up the muscle. But if you're going from like normal orchestral playing to this, it's really training the muscle. So you can't spend 4 hours a day practicing it because you'll give yourself an injury. So and it's another one like Popper 9. You know, I was laughing thinking we're doing that soon, and if I was organised, I would keep my thumb position going. Practice, you know, obviously I play loads of thumb positions, but not so extended with double stops the whole time. So for me, this was definitely a challenge, and I was crying laughing at the Baron writer said, so practice, what did they say, like practice tempo, crotchet equals 50.
Oh, yeah. I know.
And then
you can't
finish 72, and I was like, are you having a laugh? So that first beginning, like, you know, you just cannot get it to a metronome speed until you've taken everything out, line by line, separately, a bit of our usual kind of slurred in, double stop shifting. I mean, that's all, that kind of practice, well before practice.
Yeah, I have to say, I have a little bit of an issue with this concept of practice tempo that Bärenreiter puts in there. Because I kind of feel like, what does that mean? You know, I feel like it's sort of shaming people who want to play at that tempo as well. It's like, well, what if that's your final tempo? It's totally, you know, like, I think 50 is close to a really good tempo for this, actually. And, you know, there's positives and negatives, but it's almost like a range, I think. Like, 50 to 72 maybe is the final range you want to play this study in. But I take a little bit of an issue with even this concept because I think it also gives people the wrong impression that, like, number one, if you're starting slower than that you're somehow remedial, which is completely not the case. I would, like, do just tons of slow practice, and I think the majority of the work you do on this study has to be slow practice. Like, you know, 90% of it, if you want it to have a really solid foundation. And, anyway, so that's a little aside.
I love the way you're getting on the, keep up with that. Oh yeah, let's bend that. It's, you know, you have to make your own decisions, and I think sometimes people panic because there's so many slurs. And so even that one. So what they're thinking about is I can't fit that many notes into one bow at the speed I need to play it. So instead, practice it all separate bows. My favourite, slur in. Slur in.
Yes.
Et cetera, et cetera.
Sorry, that was the train going by, if you heard that. Did you
I
hear
did.
that?
I was very impressed. It was edgy. I thought I made that noise on my cello and I was like, I need more slow practice.
But so I love that you do that. I mean, obviously I did it too, that hooked bow practice. And then I think again, you knew it's coming. Stoppy starty bow is so good for the bow distribution. Once you're really confident with those shifts, but just to get a sense of how much bow you're using for everything. And I cannot emphasize enough, like when you're doing that practice, it's not about the shift so much. You need to feel really confident with the shifts before you attempt this, because this is one of the final things I think for me with the bow distribution in this. But I was gonna say, do you find this tricky apart from like the physicality of playing all these interval, all these triads and stuff and sixths and thumb position, the fact that there's always this change between open and closed, or whatever you want to call it. I actually found that was one of the biggest challenges for me, is getting my brain around where those are. And so I wrote a lot of them in. So just to clarify for people, what that means for me would be if it's a third. So if I'm doing like 1 to 3, I've got 2 whole steps or 2 whole tones happening in between my first finger and third finger. That would be open, and then the closed would be 1 half step and 1 whole step between. So the half step is between 2 and 3, and I think you can be all well and good with your strength of your thumb, but if you haven't got a really, really clear idea of that, it's just your brain I don't know about you, like you tell me if it's the same for you, but like my brain just like craps out after 2 bars otherwise. It's like,
well,
no, can't take it.
This is why this one needs more than a week, because in my part I have open and closed written anywhere that it changes. So let's say, for example, the very first one. That's exactly the same closed position, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then the next one actually changes from thumb and 2 to 1 and 3. So I have written in the semitone changes on the bottom. So I have a little bracket telling me where that semitone is, so that I know it's a tone on top and a semitone on the bottom. Because when I'm kind of going through this fast, that's a relative term, but when I am going through it, there's just too much going on. There are too many decisions to be made. Exactly. Is it thumb and 2? Is it 1 and 3? Is it open? Is it closed? Is there a semitone? Is that on the bottom or is that on the top? So, you should literally see my part. There are brackets for every semitone. There's a CL and an OP, and then sometimes it's a tone and a tone when you go to 1 and 3, and that's very unusual. So it only happens twice, I think. And it's I had to write in. So, for example, we've got here. From that B and D to the C sharp and the E. So there it's a tone and a tone going from the thumb and 2 to 1 and 3. And similarly later there's a really unusual one that just catches me. I often think that the change is going to be 1 semitone, 1 tone, which is quite the usual thing. But I really had to pay attention, and that's the kind of thing that when you're getting tired in your left hand goes straight out the window when you shift later. Yeah, and I think that is so, you think about it in a slightly different way than me, which is really good, because you think about the connection between. So you're thinking about where you're going, like if you were shifting with that finger, let's say if it was a semitone shift or a whole tone shift. Exactly. And I think about it a little bit differently, but I think your way is super. I just think about like, where am I stretching basically, and where am I not? And for me, brilliant. But yours is another element, because it is sometimes, you're right, we're not stretching the hand, we're not kind of doing this extended thing, but we have a whole tone between 2 and 3. And that again, it's like, I've done that with students where you have like the 4 different thumb positions. So you've got major, minor, extended back, and extended forward. So there's so many different ways to look at it, but I think the point is, again, you have to organize it, and you have to find the way that works for you. And and it takes a long time. Does. This doesn't just appear and feel comfortable. It doesn't matter who you are in the world. Nobody looks at this study and thinks super comfy straight off the bat. Yeah, exactly. It's a challenge. And another thing too is if you're kind of like nerding out on the theoretical side of this, which I think is super, hearing the harmonies, I get a thing in my brain where it's like, it's a minor third. So I'll instinctively think my hand needs to be small because it's minor, but that's not the case, Like if it's like let's say F sharp to A, that would be what I'd call an open position. So it's that thing as well of like separating out the different layers of information of how you're analyzing this, because
I do think this is a beautiful study, and there's so many opportunities for music in it, and like the harmonies are just gorgeous. They're just gorgeous. I did find myself being inspired by like the harmonic changes a lot, but you have to just compartmentalize, I guess, is the thing.
And I think a big thing as well is when you do get to the double stops, to remember that this is still a melody, it's still a tune. And if you can in any way let go after you've done all this hard work and working out with things, can you still think you're and how would you sing that? And so you're not going to go which is just, it's a default go-to when everyone's like, I have double steps. Go. My spike is in the ground. Yeah. if you can, after all that work, sing that. Yeah. That will even help the overall tuning and the sound, even though it doesn't feel like it should. So it's that classic case of create a line and the technicality should be improved too.
Yes, totally, 100%. And it's not enough to just do all the technique if it doesn't serve the purpose of what the music is for. And I think that's a lesson we're learning over and over again in all these studies, is that opera really is preparing us to play music, which I think is why these are so loved and are so played still today. It's there's so much relevance to how we use technique in the repertoire. So even if he does some funny weirdo things in some of them that we would never use.
I know, but we love him for that. It's all good. Yeah. What did you think of that hilarious one? So I kind of found that first section from bar 14 to the key change.
Yes.
Suddenly here, that's the other two tones area, which is really funny. This is hysterical. So often that note, if you're still back with your bow up towards the fingerboard, then you're going to squeak when you get up there. So as soon as you get to that key change, there's so many things going on because that is such a weird, there we go. And then from there, to suddenly get over the key signature and know how do you get from there to, so what happens between that? Because you can't just pluck it out of thin air. You need to actually do it related to this previous note. So you've got your F natural or E sharp on your second finger. So suddenly if you shift a semitone forward and come to a closed position, then you're ready for your next bit.
So do you mean shift a semitone, or do you? Because you're on a C sharp, right? And you're going to a
except
C sharp to A sharp. Yeah.
So you need to think about which finger are you going to use your shift. Like you can either decide to shift on your second finger or on your third or on your top line or bottom line.
Yeah, your second finger. That's so interesting. That's really interesting.
So
it's
for
so
me,
good
I needed
for the harmony.
something.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Because it's the leading note, then we're kind of ready to go. But for me, it just made more sense to go on the lower line. Yeah, it makes so much sense to do that. Yeah. Well, from a harmonic, I didn't even think of that, Ailbhe. Wow. So the way I did it, which, I mean, your way makes so much sense, is like, I practiced each side of those two bars a lot to get it in my ear. And then I thought about where the thumb's going. You know what, it's like, I always go back to these things like, from when I first learned Dvorak concerto and stuff, and like how I figured out that string crossing bit. Like, how do you find those? And I really use like this sense of geography. So, I mean, for there, it's really awkward anyway, that place. I found that's really, really difficult for the hand balance, those two bars. But I would just literally think of, where's my second finger, and then the thumb is going a semitone under
where that second finger is. So thinking shifting up a whole tone. But anyway,
Yeah.
your way is
But
actually much more intuitive.
Well, not necessarily. Basically, everyone has to figure out what makes most sense to them, and some people are actually much more muscle memory, and other people are much more internal harmony. So you have to see what your strength is and go with that. So it doesn't matter how you get there once you have a plan, and you have. I think that was the thing for this study, which I found fascinating, was so you've got. Even 2 bars later, so going into the 3rd bar of that key change. And then how do you get to this next one? How do you actually do the change?
That one. You mean?
Yeah, exactly. So, but how do you get from the crotchet before into that? So it's all these connections that I always wanted to have something that would get me there, or else like it's hysterical. I mean, because you're kind of like, what?
I wonder if the approach I take is more muscle memory, because I do a lot of double stop practice in my daily warm up. So it feels like I know a little bit inherently where those lie, I suppose.
Which is great.
I wonder if
because I don't. I mean, I always applaud the fact that you do that. I am a terrible practice to recycle person, and then I used to do lots of curl flesh, so it's in my muscles. But
it's just that's the thing. Again, like that whole thing of what works for different people. But I have to say, those 2 bars, the 27 and 29, I put a star next to both of those. Those were like everyday spots with that huge shift. Because since I do practice double steps, I practice them in scales. So I don't really practice big shifts like that in double steps that often, unless it's in a concerto type repertoire. So those 2 bars I isolated, and like before I looked at anything else in the whole piece, I practiced those, for probably a week. Just here and there.
I'm impressed, because I actually looked at those bars and went, they're really hard. I'm just going to leave them for a while.
Well, there was probably a bit of that too.
There
was probably a bit of that too. Let's be real about it. Come on, we're all human beings here. Like, the body doesn't want to do it. Like, you're gonna avoid it, right? And then it's sort of like in school, my mom always said, start with your hard homework first, and then do the easy homework. And it's
sometimes I have to ease myself in with the easy, and then get to a plateau of hard, and then ease myself out again with easy again.
I like that. And then give yourself some candy afterwards, or like. Something nice, little treat. We need to treat ourselves like really well when we're doing this hard stuff.
Yes, we do.
Anyway, so okay, what else? I mean, there's so much in this.
There is so much. I am intrigued also with the timing that you need, where you've got an awkward transfer of finger. So, for example. Sometimes it feels like the second finger is late for me transferring over. So I have to do it much faster and leave it later. And the same for the next transfer as well, because you're kind of doing this jump that you don't want in your bow, but you need in your left hand.
Yeah. I didn't even think about that.
Well, for me, it just came everywhere in like around bar 36. That's legato. This one. So I needed to actually, whatever. Your second finger has to get over before you shift, right? Or how did you approach that shift?
I did, yeah. Well.
Yeah.
I really balanced the hand more on the A string for the shift there, so everything's a little more balanced on that 3, since we can connect with that better, and then sort of allowed the second finger to move over quickly but not be the dominant note, if that makes sense. I think that's what I did. A little bit of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the next bar as well is also there. To get that third finger across, how do you shift? I actually always transferred it over and then, but it's a bit soupy that way.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's kind of stylistic, isn't it? Like,
Yeah.
you think of this late romanticism, there's a bit of that sort of in the, you know.
So your other option is to slide, and that's not really nice, is it? Now that one I seem to find okay to just. So it's really personal taste to see.
Yeah.
You can't have too many soupy shifts in a row, obviously, or it's absolutely disgusting. But you have to see which one suits more. Yeah.
Exactly, and I think another important thing about that is also the timing with the bow. So, you know, you can probably get away with different things if you're, and you know, this is legato, so when you're playing legato, you don't stop the bow, but you can slow down the bow quite a lot. Almost to a stop to sort of facilitate some of that. Well, if you find that one, because I think for myself, I haven't really analyzed these as much as you, these shifts, but I think that I probably tend to do a similar thing for every one of them. But what I would do is have a little bit more variety in the bow. So use the bow to mask some of the slurpiness.
Yeah, and it probably would be great practice for everybody to try not doing that with the bow at all first, to see how connected you can get it with the left hand first, and then deciding what your left hand is going to be, and so breaking it down that much. Yeah. And then you can use the bow for a little bit of colour.
You're absolutely right. I'm just lazy to do it. But you're right, because I always get there and I'm like, oh, I mean, because you're like, phew, I'm through the thumb position part. Now I only have to do the easy double stops and like until I get to the end, and it's sort of a breather moment. But then I always get to that, you know, those shifts, and you're like, oh, a little bit disconcerted. But
and just before at the end of 38, it took me a long time to figure out getting to that third finger, what was going on. So when I go from my F there, I need to do a semitone shift. But it, like, until I'd actually worked that out and stopped faffing about, it just was always like
it's that whole finger having that sense of finger replacement and where kind of everything is. I talk about that a lot, and it's very hard to do if you're not used to it. So, like, again, be kind to yourself, and you know,
and appreciate that this will improve over time. Yeah. You know, I just think definitely when I started this at the beginning of the week, it was unpleasant to the listener, the poor people in my family. You know, some proper studies they very much appreciate, and others they appreciate less. And at the start, this would have been one of the least appreciated poppers, because it's just when you're doing that kind of practice at the beginning, it sounds disgusting. It does, and that's okay.
It does. Yeah,
okay.
I have a sister who sometimes has a response of ugh when she hears a shifty, slurpy cello noise. It's ingrained in her from a young age, I would say.
Nice.
So it's that whole thing. So another aspect, because this is so much double stopping, I was practicing this just before we met and kind of working on running large sections. And what I found, I was like, why am I so pronated? I feel like I don't have very much flexibility. And I think that is the thing. I wonder if you found that when you're practicing all these double stops because of the extra weight in the hand, you can kind of get in a habit where you're really kind of pronated with the bow, and you're losing some of the flexibility of legato when you're doing the down to up bow, just because of the extra weight on the string to get both notes to speak. So that's something that we'll see how successful I am when I perform it. but like reminding myself when it's just one string, to really like release some of the tension that's developed in the bow hand.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I also found even at the very beginning of the double stops, just when I was suddenly going from single notes to double stops, that connection, so that I really want that to be legato, but quite often I wouldn't hear both notes on the change of bow straight away. And I just found that really fascinating, that would never happen on single notes, obviously. But there's no reason that you can't hear. It's just an exact same legato, a little bit of flexibility, but often this that we get into with double stops kind of makes everything go a bit, and then of course you're going to move off one.
And I think that is another reason why you have to practice it for more than a week, because we don't talk about it that much, but there is a strength element to playing stuff, especially something like that. I mean, we talk about strength in the thumb, but I feel like you need a certain amount of strength to play double stops consistently for that amount of time. And if you're not used to doing it, it takes a few weeks to develop that strength. And I think if you don't have that, you will press and it will get tight, and then it's hard to do.
And then the sound suffers. Yeah, it's like a singer trying to sing in a song. So the muscles have to have a while for that to work and for their voice to spin properly and all those intervals. It's the same for us. Double stops, all of these techniques that we're practicing. You need time. You need your body needs to be able to go, okay, I have this now. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's do it. So, I mean, it was enthusiastic of us to do one a week. I'm not going to lie, but it's all part of the process, right?
Well, I think we've both highlighted this, but, to anyone who's watching regularly, it is this whole thing of, it's a representation of what it's like for a musician in real life, that we are playing this today, but if it's at all possible, we will be looking ahead several weeks in advance, and that's a big part of being organized as a professional musician, is looking ahead to these things and knowing when you're going to have time to work on them, but also laying the groundwork. So for example, I have some performances coming next month, and I would lay the groundwork by having a look at everything and giving your time. Even that little bit, I think, can help your body get used to what's coming, I suppose, if that
absolutely
makes sense.
And then also recognizing the other thing where you don't have time because you have too many concerts, and that is something that you also need to make your peace with, that you can only just get it to as good as you can possibly get it for the time you have. And sometimes it's not as much as you choose, but then
let's be real, lots of times it's not. We're taught to be perfectionists, and then real life is another story. So
this is it. I love it. What did you think? Tell me about the beginning. That opening seemed. So I found I had to get my left hand much more ready. So I needed everything ready in the left hand, so my bow could actually do this. And even that slow. That kind of idea, so that we really know where the bow's going. It seemed kind of weirdly awkward, didn't it? Because you're not going to practice it as much because it's only one note. And then you start and you're like, oh, what's that?
Yeah, and it's the beginning and it has to be beautiful and all of that. Yeah,
it does. The other thing to mention about the speed is obviously the faster you play it, the less pressure is on your hand for longer. Now we say pressure, but I mean we're talking weight and things like that, but there is an inherent strength needed for that kind of thing. So the faster you play it, the less tension is going to be created or built up in the hand, but you obviously need time to make all those tiny things work, so play it at whatever speed you can and try and relax where you can.
Yeah, and I think it's a compromise. I mean, Popper is very clever because this beginning, it's so tempting to just kind of do this really flowing tempo. It feels much more comfortable in the bow, but then if you do that, you're a bit stuffed later on.
Exactly.
Having said that, I do think there are moments, of course, in all of these for a little bit of time. 15 into 16.
Yeah.
There's a beautiful
absolutely.
moment for this color change that you can enjoy, I think.
Yeah. So nice.
And I think as well, I was always taught that like you shouldn't make choices based on what facilitates the technique. You should make choices based on the music. But I think there's definitely this like middle ground where things work for the technique and also for the music. And sometimes you're really going to be better off finding the balance than, having your idealistic whatever about, this has to be exactly metronomic because Popper said so or something like that. I've got to be careful saying that though because I am a big stickler for like things being in time as well. Just one tiny thing, I think this is the last point, but articulation again. So if we look at bar 9 into 10 and we have these accents. I think it's really quite hard to get those to speak because depending on what tempo you're doing, because you're trying to really save the bow, and it's not easy for the bow, these first few bars. There's a lot of awkward changes. So I guess the thing I thought hearing those is that you can do a bit of a vibrato accent on those.
Yeah, I got that too.
You don't really have time to do a sort of long bow accent, but I do think it's interesting because instinctively from a musical standpoint I wanted it to be sort of this airy like ooh ah yada yada. But
I think he's doing it because of the harmony, right? So really it is probably just more of a vague accent considering all of the things he said. So I totally agree, yeah. Mm-hmm. We can kind of make it work, but it doesn't have to be a huge deal. I don't think. It doesn't have to be a hey-ya one.
It doesn't, no, not at all. I just think it's very easy to like go along and not do it at all. So it's making
or
sure that you
too much and then you've no bow left. So one or the other.
Yeah. That happy medium, that balance,
Right.
Ancient Greeks. Let's do. I think it's my turn to go first today.
I think you're right.
I know. Say my prayers.
Have fun.
Thanks. Oh my gosh, that was amazing.
Awesome. Oh my gosh.
That was an experience.
It sounded great. I mean, you can really tell you practice your double stops every day. I keep saying it, but it's true.
Oh,
it's
you're
really
so
true. You're
kind.
like laying them down. It's great. And they just sound like they're easy for you, so...
They're
I'm
not.
Sure.
It's still such an experience to perform that because you're like, oh, none of that stuff happened before, you know, and it is that whole thing of this is really hard stuff. It's really hard stuff, and even when you feel really confident with a certain aspect of technique, it's still. So, do you know what? I mean, there are so many things I like massively respect about you, but I gotta say, like, one of them, just, you know, your commitment to like playing music, like to actually creating music, even in something that's like as hard as this. I mean, it's just so inspiring. Like,
thank you.
It was
so
beautiful.
kind.
It was gorgeous.
Thank you. I mean, sometimes it's very successful and sometimes it's less successful, but you know, I suppose you gotta try, right? Like, even just learning this is something to be proud of, not to talk of trying to make an actual performance of it online that will last forever in a week. I mean, this is an achievement day, so we definitely deserve a treat.
I'll say, but you know what? I don't know about you, Ailbhe, but there's this thing of like when you've worked hard and then you deserve a treat afterwards. It's just so satisfying.
Yes,
I love it.
is.
I'm kind of addicted to that. So, you know, that's probably
Me
why
too.
it's probably why we're crazy and are doing this.
Yeah, exactly. Treat every week. Woohoo!
I know. Anyway, really well done.
Well,
super, and
yeah, you too, and such a pleasure as always.
yay, cool. Well, see you soon for the next
you next
one.
week.
Woo,
Bye.
bye.